Hello again. Here we are to talk about JavaScript and data visualization. In the last couple lessons, we went through some JavaScript to extract relevant values from the Titanic data set, right? So we pulled out numbers and interesting ideas. Now, this class, what I'd like to do is, start like working out how we're going to display them on the screen. And there's a few ways to do this. We can use HTML elements and CSS, okay? And that's probably the easiest way to do it, but has some limitations. We can use Canvas, which is a little bit more work, but you can pretty much draw anything with Canvas. And then there's also SVG, right? So SVG is kind of in between the two, and SVG is very powerful. There's a lot you can do with it. For this lesson today, we're going to use HTML and CSS, okay? But then we're going to actually use SVG and Canvas in two future projects. So here I am, I'm in the class repo here, and I'm going to scroll down to the syllabus. So we're on class number 3 right now, and I'm going to click on the lesson here, right? So this is the homework assignment. So let me kind of go over the ideas in the context of the homework, right? So the idea is you're going to take the Titanic data set and you can download this repo, and it includes some like starter code here with this HTML, index HTML script tag and the style sheet. And then there's the Titanic data right here in this file. Okay, so it's all set up to import the Titanic data. And then these other files are just some pictures, right, showing some sample work, right? So your goal is to essentially create an HTML element for each passenger. So imagine that as a div, right? And then what we can do is we could set the size of the div based on the passenger's age or how much they paid for their fare. We can set the color of the passenger based on their gender or on the port where they embarked. We can add a border to it. We can round the corners, depending on one feature or another. And so your goal here is, it is a little limited, but there's also like those limitations can maybe turn up creative ideas. Your idea is to try and display as much of this information as you can. So we can display how many passengers if we create a div for each passenger. We can color the divs or shape them or set a border or set the opacity based on how many survived. So survivors maybe are 100% opacity, casualties are 50% opaque. We can, so that would show both of these items, right? We can either put an icon or maybe do the shape as for to change like squares for men, round the corners for female passengers, right? Oops, spelling error. And we can maybe set the color or the border based on the border style based on where they embarked from, right? And we're also going to try and do maybe show the passenger class. Maybe we could show that as a number within each div. I don't know, right? So your goal is to try and get creative and see how many of these things you can incorporate into the style for each of these elements that we display. So here's a couple examples, right? I have a list here of properties that you could use. So background color, opacity, width, height, border radius, border width, color, and style. And then I have, some examples. So let's imagine here I'm showing all of the passengers, right? And what I did here is I set the gender as the color. So they're red and blue. So the red ones are men, or the blue ones are men and the red ones are women. The age is passengers that are below 18 years of age show a smaller square, right? And then the survived passengers are 50% opaque, right? Or the casualties, right? So these passengers here did not survive, right? This one and this one survived, and that one survived, right? Okay. Here's another version, right? Showing a lot of the same things, but then I added a couple things here. I changed it so female passengers are round, right? And the male passengers are square. and then I use the embarked to set the color. So um, red is passengers that embarked at Southampton. People that got on at Queenstown are blue, and what is that? Catham, or I forget what the C was, but those are gold, right? And then here's another one. I forget what I did with the border there. Oh, I guess I did first class passengers with a border, right? So there's a few of those, right? And then, we can also sort, right? So after we have all the data there, here I sorted everybody on port of embarkation, right? So these guys got on at the seaport. These were Queenstown, I think, and these were Southampton, right? So actually a lot of people got on at Southampton. And then here's the ones that did not survive, right? Okay. And, maybe in a way, like if you can't show all that data in one graph, maybe we could create two graphs, right? So here I separated the two groups by male and female passengers. And then here I separated the groups by port, like embarkation, and then here I kind of did everything, right? But anyway, that's kind of just a general idea to get started, right? So the basic idea here is that we want to generate a div that represents each of the passengers, and then we want to style that div based on the features of that particular passenger, right? So age, fare, class, gender, and port of embarkation, fare. There's a couple other properties, right? So let's take a quick look at the code and how you might get started on this, right? So I'm gonna go up here and I'll just download the code as a zip. That should put it in my my downloads folder here, so I can open that up. And maybe I'll open this up in VS Code. So here it is in VS Code. And in VS Code here, you can see like the whole repo. There's a bunch of images. These are just the pictures that we looked at, right? And then the code that we're going to work with is the index.html, script.js, and the style CSS. And actually, I didn't even use the style CSS here, right? So first of all, index.html. So when I look here, what I'm going to see is just a minimal HTML page that imports the script tag as a module. Okay, so that will allow us to use import inside script.js, right? So that what's going to happen here in script.js is we're going to import Titanic data. Next, there's a div here called Titanic. It's got the ID Titanic. So what we're going to do is we're going to generate all of the passenger divs are going to go in here. Okay, so passenger divs will be here, and we're going to generate all of these dynamically through code. So next, let's look at the script tag. So I put some starter code in here just to get you started. There's not a lot there, and then there's a bunch of comments here, and you can try these comment challenges there, and then do your own ideas too. So at the top here, I imported the Titanic data, so that came from the file down here, and then I got a reference to the Titanic div, right? We saw that was called ID Titanic, right? So this is the div. And what I did is I used JavaScript to style the div. So I gave it, and we could have put this in our style sheet too, but what I did is I named the element, the HTML element, and that I got right here reference to, and I said .style, and then I named one of the style properties. So just like in your style sheet, if you said display : grid, this would be the JavaScript equivalent. So I say element.style.display, and then I give it the value of grid. And then I set the grid template columns to 20 columns, 10 pixels wide each, and then I set the grid gap to 1 pixel, right? So next, I looked through the data and I used map to transform each passenger into a div. And I broke this up into steps. You could actually combine these steps together if you wanted to, but I did it each as a separate step so we can see each step along the way, right? And kind of examine it. So here I have a passenger, and I'm just going to create a brand new div. And creating the div doesn't actually place it in the DOM. okay, but it just makes a div. And what I did is I returned that here. So now I have an array of passenger divs. And these divs, actually, they're not even really associated with a passenger. So I could have just looped from, with a for loop like I equals, up to the count of the passenger of the data, right? But anyway, I did it this way with map. So there's my passenger. I've got an array of divs here. They're not visible on the DOM yet. So what I did next is I said, let's append each of those to the DOM. So I did a for each, and for each passenger in here, this should have been a div, and then I appended that as a child element to the Titanic div. So now each of those divs is a child element of Titanic, okay? So now they're actually in the DOM. And next, what I want to do, and again, like we could have combined this step and this step, but I broke each one into its own loop, right? It would have been a little more efficient if I put them all in one. So next, what I want to do is I want to style each of those divs. So I did another for each loop, and for each div in the passenger array, I said div or element dot style dot width, and I made each div 10 pixels wide by 10 pixels high, and then gave it a background color of black. Okay, so this is like a very basic visualization, right? So I'm gonna run this here in the in live server, so we see the file here. You'll have to run this in a local host server, so you can download the live server plugin for VS Code, or you can run it in another server. If you just open the HTML page from your desktop, it won't work because I'm using the module. So if you try to open it with a module, you'll get a CORS error because it won't let you load a file from your desktop, okay? So anyway, so there we go. So I've got all my passengers. They're all 10 by 10 squares. So let's try a couple problems, right? Just for fun. So let me actually rearrange this here. So here's my Titanic view, and let's try a couple things. So I'm going to close this up and move this over here so I can see both. So let's imagine now what I want to do is, I guess I can't make that one any smaller. There, maybe I can make this a little smaller. There we go. Actually, what if I just move that over a little bit there? Okay, there we go, right? Okay, so let's imagine that I want to style the container. So the container is what's arranging all these little black boxes on a grid, and I'm going to make 20 columns, each 10 pixels wide. So this is 20 columns here. What if I thought maybe like 30 columns would look better? Okay, right? So I'll do 30 columns there, so I can just change the value. Maybe I want to add a little more space between each one, so I'll do 2 pixels, right? So that's maybe a little more space. If I make the column size wider, like 15, then let's do it like 14, how about, right? Actually, let's do 15 and then change the number of columns to 24, right? So, I can play with the numbers that way. Changing the width here of the grid columns only changes the width of the column. It doesn't actually change the width of the divs. So if I want to change the divs, I'll have to go down here, and instead of making them 10 pixels, I can make them 15 by 15. Okay, so then that changes that, right? So that's not too bad. Maybe I'll make it like a little bit wider, maybe like 26. There we go, right? So now I can see them all. Okay, so next, let's imagine that we're looping over the passenger data here, right? And we need a way to connect each passenger div to each passenger from the data, right? So each element in the passenger array is a DOM element. It's a div. It's one of these boxes, but it's not the data from the Titanic data set, right? But I have one box for every record here. So essentially, like the first div is index 0, and so is the first passenger in data. And if we loop over all the data with for each, we can also get the index of the element, right? So let's try that. So what if I wanted to color each of these boxes based on the port of embarkation? Or actually, let's do an easier one. Let's do the border radius and use the gender for that, right? So what we'll do is we'll let me put it at the bottom here, right? So let's say passenger div dot style dot border radius. There we go, right? Okay, equals, and I can set some value here, right? So remember, in CSS, all of the styles use kebab case, right? So we would say width here, but we would say background dash color. So if you convert these names to camel case, then you get the JavaScript style name. Okay, so border radius in your style sheet would look like this, border dash radius, but we would convert it to border with an uppercase R, camel case, right? Okay, so if I do this, if I say like 50% border radius, then they're all going to be round, but I only want the female passengers to be round, right? So what I'll do is I'll use the ternary here, so I can say data bracket I, because I get the I here, and then I can say dot fields dot sex equals female. So if sex is female, then we'll do border radius 50%. Otherwise, colon, we can do border radius of 0. And then we can see all of the female passengers, right? And and then you could follow that through and try your own ideas, right? So that hopefully should get you started. And then I'll do another video where we go over some of the other ideas down here, but here's some challenges for you. So with that as a starting place, maybe read through these challenges and see if you can solve some of them. So I actually solved this one here, right? And change the grid template columns, right? And then you can try some of these other ones, right? And see how far you can get, and then you can go back and watch the next video, and I'll cover some of the other ideas there. Thanks for watching.